bug pinning quick session here with the death head hawk moth, Acherontia atropos, and this is a pretty popular moth. They're fairly easy to spread. I'm taking him out of his envelope that I hydrated overnight. I have all my tools ready, pins, little tweezer guys, anything I need to do to actually complete the task, paper for putting his wings down, and the only thing that I need to worry about is if the antenna came off during shipping or something's broken. But now that I have the moth here, I can take a look. So these moths have been around forever, and they're known as bee robbers. They actually take honey from beehives at night. They can vibrate their abdomens, and they also can make noise at certain frequencies that bees respond to. It kind of convinces them that they're one of the guards or one of the bees that is supposed to be at the hive at night, when all the bees kind of go back to the hive and sleep and take a rest. So a bee robber, you can kind of see where they got the name. They mimic giant bees. But what's really cool about these guys is they're one of the few moths that actually can screech when they're agitated. They can actually make an audible sound, and that's why there's lore behind them. Ancient people thought that noise was them ferrying the souls of the departed to the afterlife, and so they kind of got a creepy legacy behind them, a mythos. And so this is Acherontia atropos, or atropos, and there's two other species in the genus. There's Styx and there's Lachesis. Of course, Styx is named after the river Styx in Greek mythology. Atropos is the goddess of fate. She's the one who cuts the threads. She's the elder of the Moria in Greek mythology. And Lachesis is another one who determines the length of the lifespan of each mortal. So they're all kind of named with fates and souls going to the afterlife in mind. Styx is the lesser death head hawk moth. Has a slightly different mask. It's a little bit more gray and silver. Isn't quite as white. So the Atropos is the one that's usually referenced to having a death head or a skull. The Lachesis is much bigger than both of them. This is the medium African death head hawk moth, but the Lachesis is twice the size of this, and its mask is got a little bit more red and gray in it. It's not at all. It's definitely cool looking, but it doesn't end up having that white stormtrooper kind of goofy eye skull head here. And so they come in lots of variations, and featured in the movie Silence of the Lambs is basically this moth. They reference Styx this moth is featured for sure. Styx is the one they probably showed in the movie, but on the cover you see an actual skull here, like a human skull. And that's actually a Salvador Dali drawing. It's a sketch of 7 women whose their bodies, the negative space around them, creates a skull. The way they lay down, their feet are the teeth, that kind of thing. And so people sometimes expect to see an actual straight skull on this moth, and that's just not the case. It's evolutionary, already pretty cool that they have these markings, but it's more about their environment and what their life's about. So they're actually sphinx moths, and they rob honey from bees, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and pin him out. I'm just making sure the wings are nice and flexible here. They seem to be working pretty good. I'm going to cut off some paper. Let's see here. So what I want to do is get one wing out straight, just like that. I'm going to paper the end of it. Tying down the end by the tip gives it a lot more leverage. It has the fight much harder to close if you anchor the tip furthest point from the joint. So this will kind of keep it in place. If I was to tape back here, it would still slide a little bit. Another thing you can do is you can pull this one out, the hind wing here. Also paper that. Some people, if they're in a hurry, they can take a thin entomology needle like this, and they can kind of pin right next to the vein under the joint, and then you can hide that little hole underneath the forewing. And that's just a real quick way to get it to stabilize while you then either get some paper, or sometimes people use double thick glass, like 5mm or so glass. That's pretty good for making it super flat. Sometimes not the most realistic application. I like to have a little bit of volume, but glass works pretty well. And he's almost done. Actually, this is a female, but who's paying attention? Let's see. And so in the Harris novel, Silence of the Lambs, they actually mentioned a different moth altogether. They mentioned Erebus ordora, which is a black witch moth, which is a species native to like Texas and in the southern Midwest. We have black witches in Arizona, and they're a different kind of moth. They have much bigger wings. They're mostly dark all over. They don't have any super striking, distinct features like the death head, the skull here. But they do have little round eyelets that are bluish. They're a dark brown moth. They're significant in size. They're many times bigger wingspan, and they have thick wings. They're pretty impressive in their own right. And the black witches, again named Erebus, which is again the land of darkness in Greek mythology. Also, we named a mountain in Antarctica Erebus, so it's got some cool mythology behind it too. So that was the technically the original moth in Silence of the Lambs was a black witch moth. But I think Hollywood and all the other guys got together and said, what about this moth? This moth is visually, it's just striking that it has these natural features that kind of go hand in hand with the theme of Silence of the Lambs, with Buffalo Bill and all of his weirdness. So, just a little bit of movie knowledge on you. They even in the movie itself, they actually have the pupa of a tobacco hornworm moth because they're so big, and then inside of it they have like a Styx moth, Acherontia Styx. It's kind of funny that they did everything they could to make it all visually impressive, and they used multiple moth species to kind of sell the story there in the movie. But in the book, it's a black witch moth. But I always kind of like that they used the Salvador Dali drawing to kind of emphasize the skull features. And so, pretty typical with pinning. I do one side first after I stabilize the body. I always cross the pins. I don't really stab the thorax. Once I get one wing out, do the hind wing, make sure he's nice and even, and then I'll compare the symmetry to the other side. And then if I like the stripes or the features on one side better than the other, you can always adjust the wings a little bit here and there. And that's pretty much it for this moth. I'm going to do another one because I have time, and I hydrated too, just in case one wasn't up to the task of being pinned here. Sometimes they don't hydrate very well, and they're a little bit more difficult, so in case one wasn't ready, I could just do the other one. So I have this one out here. This one I just pulled out has an even wider skull. So they're all going to be slightly different, and as you kind of push the setae around, which is kind of their hair, you can kind of express those features a little bit and see what they're really looking like under there. So this is on the thorax, is this feature, and then you can see the eyes. There's their mouth under here. And interesting thing about moths and butterflies is their tongue, which is what people associate with the kind of that tube that comes out and takes nectar and it curls right back up. That's actually modified mandibles. That's their lower jaw. And it comes in two pieces when they hatch from their chrysalis or their pupa, their cocoon. And what happens is right away, they're almost like a zipper-like structure. The two pieces of the mandible, excuse me, will kind of collide together and stick together, and then they produce a resin that hardens and fastens it. So those two pieces are separate as they turn into adults, and then they harden a resin between those little zipper-like structures that ride down both tubes or both jaws, excuse me, and they kind of create that structure. So it is not their tongue, it's technically their lower jaw, which is just why insects are so crazy. They're just, everyone's so weird. Every species is just out there. We're going to get him positioned. I like to pin behind the antenna against the head and the thorax to kind of keep him in. This is a very simple spreading board. Usually I have the ones that close together, pinch the thorax, pinch the body, kind of push the wings out even further, lock in the legs and stuff. For these guys, moths, especially these moths, are very simple to spread. Their bodies are very wide. They fit right in the groove. It's their own pressure that holds them in place, so the pins are just kind of nice to move things out of the way. And then I'm going to get him. Yeah, he's even more ready. Put his leg up, or his wing up here. And I generally make an acute angle away from the wing and an obtuse angle towards the structure that I'm pinning, so that way the paper doesn't slide in any one direction. Let me see here. And I actually might just use a little pin strategy here on this one too. Make sure the wing's out and where I want it. Flatten this wing down, flatten that wing down. Can take the needle out at this point and just make sure I lock that in. Now the Acherontia atropos is probably the prettier of the three species, at least according to feedback I get. They have the striking yellow spots. They all kind of have this, but they have a combination where it could be more of the dark gray, slate color, less of the yellow. These wings have a lot of yellow with the very striking stripes right across it. The bigger ones and the smaller ones, the sticks and the lachesis, they have the same kind of color palette, but definitely different amounts. And so these ones are the more aesthetic, they're more popular. And again, these guys are the African species. They are the medium species. They're definitely not the biggest. I have all three, and I probably will do a video of me pinning each one, each species, just for fun, so you guys get a better look at what we're doing here. Now this wing was a little bent, a little lower, so I'm going to try a little harder to move him forward. I think he wants to not flatten out too much here. There we go. And now what I'll do is the same. I'll just pin the hind wing behind the forewing, and then I will flatten them both. There's a little shiny piece that looks like a gold flake or foil, and that's right where the vein is, and you can kind of pierce that and move it forward. And then once I get that stuck for a second, I can flatten the whole thing out. And then I can move this wing to where I think it should go. Now what I'm doing is looking at the negative space here to see if I like these shapes, if they're about the same. Now he's kind of tilted. Her body's a little tilted, so one wing's closer to the board than the other, so it looks kind of funky, but when I pin him, when I put a post on and frame him, I'm actually going to just make sure the post is at an angle so I can actually rotate it a little bit, keep it straight up and down, and it'll look a little bit more symmetrical. Little leg hanging out here, I'll keep that, that's fun. And then that is the second Ashrantia atropos here. And there you go. Those are the famous bee robber moths, or the death head hawk moths from Silence of the Lambs. Although I hope some of that information I gave you about them using Ashrantia sticks and a hornworm moth and some of the other stuff related to that story kind of adds a little bit of flavor. A lot going on there. And then I'll probably pin a black witch moth and compare the two side by side, because the black witch moth is about this big. They're huge. They're very cool. But anyways, thank you for joining. Talk to you guys later.